The battlefield stretched as far as Commander Zektal's crimson eyes could see, a desolate wasteland of smoldering debris and shattered landscapes. What had once been a thriving human colony now lay in ruins, the air thick with the acrid stench of burning metal and scorched earth. Zektal allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he surveyed the destruction, his talons tapping a slow rhythm against the console of his flagship. The humans had been resilient, he admitted grudgingly, but in the end, they had crumbled like all the others. Status report, he barked, his voice sharp and commanding, echoing in the cavernous bridge of the ship. A subordinate, a wiry creature with pale, translucent skin, snapped to attention. The outpost is secure, Commander. Resistance was heavier than anticipated, but their forces have been neutralized. Casualties on our side remain within acceptable parameters. Zektal grunted in approval, but his thoughts churned beneath the surface. Humanity had been an enigma from the start. Unlike the countless other species the Coalition had conquered, the humans had neither surrendered immediately nor launched a reckless counteroffensive. Instead, they had retreated, fortified, and waited. To Zektal, it was a peculiar strategy, one that hinted at either remarkable foresight or crippling indecision. The human silence unnerved him, though he would never admit it. In the grand campaign to subjugate the galaxy, his coalition had encountered defiance before, but there was something different about this species. They didn't fight like prey. They fought like predators who understood patience. The doors to the bridge hissed open, and two guards entered, dragging a prisoner between them. The human emissary was a pitiful sight, bloodied, bruised, but unbroken. His uniform, though tattered, still bore the insignia of the Terran Defense Corps, a stark reminder of the adversary Zektal sought to crush. The prisoner was forced to his knees, but he refused to bow his head. "You should have negotiated," the man said, his voice steady despite his injuries. Zektal tilted his head, intrigued by the human's defiance. "Negotiated? Your species clings to the illusion of strength, yet your colonies fall like leaves in the wind. What would you have us negotiate? The terms of your extinction?" The human's lips curled into a faint smile. "You misunderstand. Negotiation was never about sparing us. It was about sparing you." Before Zektal could respond, an alert blared through the bridge, the harsh sound slicing through the tension like a blade. "Commander, incoming transmission on all frequencies," one of the technicians called out. "Patch it through," Zektal ordered, his curiosity piqued. The holographic projector in the center of the room hummed to life, casting a shimmering image into the air. The figure that appeared was unmistakably human, clad in a stark black uniform adorned with symbols that Zektal could not decipher, but instinctively recognized as marks of authority. The man's face was sharp, his eyes cold and calculating, like a predator sizing up its prey. "This is Admiral Elias Vorn of the Terran Defense Command," the figure began, his voice calm yet resonant, carrying the weight of 1,000 battles fought and won. "To the Coalition forces, your actions have been noted, your intent understood, and your fate decided." Zektal felt a ripple of unease pass through the bridge crew, their usual composure faltering under the Admiral's piercing gaze. "For months, we've observed your campaigns of terror, your attempts to sow chaos and fear among our people," Vorn continued, his tone sharpening. "You believe our restraint to be weakness. You are mistaken." The hologram leaned forward, as if the Admiral could see Zektal directly through the projection. "Since you chose war, let us show you how it's done." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Zektal's claws clenched the edge of the console, his mind racing. The human's message was not one of surrender, but of calculated intent. It was a declaration, not of desperation, but of confidence. For the first time, Zektal felt the faint stirrings of doubt. "Commander," the subordinate at the console called out, his voice trembling. "Reports are coming in. Human fleets are mobilizing across multiple sectors. Our outposts in the Syndral Expanse and Valera Nebula have gone dark. They're striking back." Zektal turned toward the viewport, his gaze fixed on the distant stars. The humans had been silent for too long, and now he understood why. They had been preparing, waiting for the precise moment to unleash their response. They think they can intimidate us with words, Zektal said, though the conviction in his voice faltered. Prepare our fleets. We will meet them head-on and remind them of their place in the galaxy. As the crew scrambled to carry out his orders, the human prisoner laughed, a dry, rasping sound that cut through the tension like a blade. Why do you laugh, human? Zektal demanded, his voice a mixture of anger and unease. Because, the prisoner said, his smile widening despite the blood on his lips. You have no idea what you've unleashed. For the first time in his long and storied career, Zektal felt something he had never experienced before: fear. As the stars outside the viewport seemed to shimmer with an unnatural light, he realized the humans were no longer prey but predators, and they were coming. The first strike came without warning. In the dead of space, where silence reigned supreme, the Coalition's forward fleet disintegrated in an instant, consumed by a cascade of explosions that rippled outward like ripples on a pond. Commander Zektal watched in disbelief as the tactical display on his flagship transformed into a sea of red markers, each representing a vessel lost to the void. There had been no warning, no indication of an incoming attack. Just the sudden, overwhelming realization that the humans were no longer merely defending. They were hunting. All ships, regroup. Zektal roared, his voice echoing through the bridge as his claws gripped the edge of the console. We cannot allow them to divide us. But the damage had already been done. The Coalition's fleet, a carefully coordinated armada, now reeled in disarray. Human ships appeared and disappeared like phantoms, their sleek forms darting between the gaps in the Coalition's formation. Their weapons struck with precision, targeting engines, weapon systems, and life support with cold efficiency. Commander, we're receiving reports of localized EMP bursts across all sectors. One of Zektal's officers called out, his voice tight with panic. They're blinding us, disrupting our communications and sensor arrays. Zektal's mandibles clicked in frustration. He had underestimated them. The humans weren't engaging in a conventional battle. They were dismantling the Coalition's forces piece by piece, exploiting every weakness with surgical precision. As if to underscore his realization, the lights on the bridge flickered, and the tactical display wavered before resetting with a cascade of error messages. The humans had struck at the fleet's command network, severing its ability to coordinate effectively. Then came the messages. Across every channel, the same haunting voice echoed, calm and methodical. Your fleets are in disarray. Your leaders are paralyzed. Surrender, and we will consider sparing what remains of your forces. Resist, and you will face annihilation. Zektal clenched his fists, his pride warring with the cold reality unfolding around him. He turned to his communications officer. Jam those transmissions. I will not have my crew demoralized by their posturing. The officer hesitated, his fingers trembling over the controls. Commander, they've overridden our encryption protocols. I can't stop it. Zektal snarled in frustration, but forced himself to remain composed. He would not allow the humans' psychological warfare to undermine his authority. Focus on regaining control of the fleet. We still outnumber them. Overwhelm them with sheer force if we must. But sheer force proved ineffective. The humans fought not as individuals, but as a unified machine, their tactics honed to perfection. Squadrons of drones swept through the battlefield like swarms of locusts, their movements too precise, too coordinated to be random. Even when Coalition ships managed to target them, the drones seemed to anticipate every attack, evading with impossible agility. On the surface of Valera Prime, where the Coalition's ground forces had established a foothold, the situation was no better. Human mechanized units descended from orbit, their sleek frames bristling with advanced weaponry. Coalition soldiers, trained to fight conventional infantry, found themselves outmatched by machines that moved faster, hit harder, and adapted with terrifying speed. In the midst of this chaos, a single figure emerged as the face of humanity's retaliation. Known only as Agent Kale, the operative's exploits became the stuff of legend among both humans and Coalition forces. Kale infiltrated the Coalition's flagship itself, slipping past security measures that Zektal had considered impenetrable. By the time the alarms were raised, it was too late. Critical systems had been sabotaged, false orders had been disseminated, and entire squadrons had been sent into ambushes orchestrated by their own fleet. Zektal stared at the aftermath of one such ambush on the tactical display, his claws digging into the console. He could not deny the skill and cunning of this operative, but what unnerved him most was the impersonal efficiency with which Kale operated. There was no taunting, no gloating, just the cold, calculated dismantling of his forces. "We cannot win like this," his second-in-command said, breaking the silence. The officer's voice was low, almost reluctant, as if the words themselves were an act of treason. "The humans are not fighting a war. They are executing a strategy. They know our every move before we make it." Zektal turned to him, his eyes blazing with defiance. "Do you suggest we surrender?" "No," the officer replied, though his hesitation betrayed his doubt. "But we must rethink our approach. They are forcing us to fight on their terms." Before Zektal could respond, a priority alert flashed across the console. The humans had launched a new weapon, an experimental device that defied explanation. Coalition forces on the surface of Valera Prime reported an intense gravitational anomaly that distorted the battlefield, pulling Coalition soldiers and vehicles into chaotic whirlpools of energy. Those who survived described it as if the planet itself had turned against them. For the first time, Zektal felt the icy grip of fear clutch at his chest. He had prided himself on his ability to anticipate and adapt, but the humans operated on a level he could barely comprehend. Every move he made seemed to play directly into their hands. A new message came through the fractured comm channels, this time directed specifically at Zektal. The hologram of Admiral Vorn appeared once more, his expression impassive, but his words carrying the weight of inevitability. "Commander Zektal," Vorn began, "you have seen the futility of your campaign. Your fleet is broken, your soldiers scattered, and your weapons rendered ineffective. This is your final opportunity to surrender. Refuse, and we will show you no mercy." Zektal's mandibles clicked in frustration, but deep down, he knew the truth. The humans had given him no room to maneuver, no opportunity to regain the upper hand. His pride screamed at him to fight to the bitter end, but his instincts, honed over years of warfare, whispered a darker truth. The war was already lost. The hologram flickered and disappeared, leaving Zektal alone with his thoughts. The humans had played their hand, and it was clear they were holding all the cards. As he stared out at the distant stars, now filled with the faint glimmers of advancing human fleets, he realized that the final battle was not one of ships and weapons, but of will. The aftermath of the war hung heavy in the void, an oppressive silence settling over the shattered remnants of the Coalition fleet. Commander Zektal sat alone in the observation chamber of his flagship, his eyes fixed on the pale, unyielding light of a distant star. He had surrendered. The word tasted bitter, like ash on his tongue. To the Coalition, he had been the architect of conquest, the strategist who could bend the galaxy to his will. And now, he was a relic of defeat. The transmission had come hours ago, delivered with the same calculated efficiency that defined humanity's every move. The terms were simple: unconditional capitulation. Refusal would result in the complete eradication of the Coalition's remaining forces. Zektal had signed the treaty with a trembling hand, his pride bleeding out alongside the ink. He told himself it was for the survival of his people, but the hollow ache in his chest whispered of failure. A chime echoed through the chamber, and the door hissed open to reveal the human envoy. The figure was smaller than Zektal had anticipated, clad in a dark uniform marked with the insignia of the Terran Defense Command. Despite their unassuming stature, the envoy carried themselves with a quiet authority that filled the room. "You requested this meeting," the envoy said, their voice calm but tinged with an edge of curiosity. "I did." Zektal rose to his full height, towering over the human. But even now, the gesture felt hollow, a desperate attempt to reclaim a dominance that no longer existed. "I wish to understand." The envoy's brow furrowed slightly. "Understand what, commanders?" "Why you spared us," Zektal said, his voice low but laced with frustration. You had the power to annihilate us completely. It would have been easier, cleaner. Yet you allowed us to live. Why? The envoy regarded him for a moment, their expression unreadable. Then they stepped forward, the distance between them closing like the final move in a game of strategy. Because destruction is not our goal, they said. Survival is? Zektal's mandibles clicked softly in contemplation. Survival? You could have ensured your survival by eradicating the coalition. Instead, you chose restraint. It is illogical. It is human, the envoy corrected. Our history is filled with conflict, Commander. Wars that consumed entire generations. Battles fought over resources, ideologies, and pride. We learned the cost of unchecked destruction long before we reached the stars. What you saw was not restraint, it was understanding. We fight only when we must, and we end wars not with vengeance, but with purpose. Zektal's claws tapped against the armrest of his chair as he processed their words. The humans had shown him their strength, their capacity for destruction, and yet it was this philosophy, this calculated mercy, that left him feeling truly defeated. They had not crushed the coalition through brute force alone. They had dismantled it with a precision born of experience and a will tempered by pain. The envoy's gaze softened slightly, as if sensing his inner turmoil. Your coalition underestimated us, as many have before. You believed our silence was weakness, our patience naivety. But in truth, it was preparation. We hoped to avoid this war, Commander. We gave you every opportunity to walk away. When you chose war, we showed you what that choice meant. A bitter laugh escaped Zektal's throat, harsh and grating. And now you sit here, lecturing me on the consequences of my actions. Do you think this will change anything? Do you believe the coalition will suddenly see you as benevolent overlords? We don't want to be overlords, the envoy replied, their tone steady but firm. We want peace, genuine peace, not the fragile truce that comes from fear, but the kind born of mutual respect and understanding. If you and your coalition cannot see that, then this war will have been for nothing. Zektal fell silent, his thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The envoy's words gnawed at the edges of his pride, forcing him to confront truths he had long ignored. For years, the coalition had operated on a foundation of dominance, believing that strength alone could secure order. But now, staring into the eyes of an adversary who had mastered both war and peace, he wondered if they had been wrong all along. You claim to seek peace, he said at last, his voice quieter now. But how can I trust that your actions match your words? How can I believe that this mercy is genuine? The envoy's lips curved into a faint smile, though there was no humor in it. You don't have to trust us, Commander. Trust is earned, not given. What we offer is the opportunity to build that trust, to create a future where neither of our peoples has to live in fear of the other. The choice is yours. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the distant hum of the ship's engines. Zektal stared at the envoy, searching their expression for any trace of deception. He found none. At last he inclined his head, a gesture of reluctant respect. You are different from any adversary I have faced. Perhaps there is wisdom in your words, even if it wounds my pride to admit it. The envoy nodded, their expression softening. The greatest victories are not won on the battlefield, Commander. They are won in moments like this, when enemies choose to become something more. As the envoy turned to leave, Zektal called out to them one final time. What will become of us? The envoy paused at the doorway, their silhouette framed by the pale light of the corridor beyond. That depends on you, they said. You have seen what we are capable of. Now it is your turn to decide what you will become. The door slid shut behind them, leaving Zektal alone with his thoughts. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of not just defeat but possibility. The humans had given him a choice, and for the first time, he wondered if the path forward could be one of creation rather than destruction. As he gazed out at the stars, their cold light unchanging and eternal, he realized the war was truly over. What remained now was the far greater challenge of building something new.